Hi, everybody. It's Bob Ost, and it's Friday. It's August, what is it, August 5th, I think. I never remember the date. I'm so terrible with the date. No, August 8th. August 8th, that's it. And this is the TRU Community Gathering. For those of you who are finding us randomly out there, or just saw us listed and decided to click and see what we're about. TRU Theater Resources Unlimited is a art services organization that I co-founded 33 years ago. And it was originally dedicated to helping people understand the producing side of theater. And over the years, we've grown and we've developed, and we do all sorts of programs that help people understand the business of theater in general. We do focus on producers, but we now also include writers and artists and actors and oh my, whoever else is doing this. And we try to support them and help them do everything that they're doing successfully. So a funny thing happened in 2020. A virus called COVID hit, and suddenly we went into shutdown. So my small little arts organization in Manhattan, we had no way of doing our usual live programming, and everything we had done had been live. So we were pushed to open up a Zoom room. I was kicking and screaming all the way, but I finally did. I opened up the Zoom room, and I discovered the world of virtual here. And I also discovered that by being virtual, we could invite people in or have people come and join us from around the world, around the country. We actually have two people today from Australia who are with us in the room. So I'm very excited about that. And we hope that you out there will also enjoy what we're doing, which is basically talking about theater and all aspects of the arts every week. I think this is a 260 something week that I've been doing this consecutively. Our conversations, of course, have changed over the 5 years that we've been doing this, and now we're back to the new normal. We're back to the normal in a world that doesn't feel very normal to a lot of us. But in any case, we're trying to do what we do, and we're trying to keep our focus on the arts and our focus on supporting each other and being a community. So we're talking about one of my favorite topics. Today we're talking about one of my favorite topics. I am a musical theater writer. I'm a playwright who writes non-musicals, but I also do write and love musicals. And we even teach a workshop on about writing new musicals here at TRU. So I love finding people who are involved and engaged and really actively helping develop and support this art form. And I do consider it an art form. Some say it's the unique American art form. You're going to meet Ben Krywosz in a second. He's in Minnesota, just underlining the fact that we don't just do things in Manhattan anymore. We have our guest coming in who's from Minnesota, and he interests me in many ways. I originally interpreted what I read about him as meaning that he really had an opera background. He does, but he really, at heart, I think, is more musical theater than opera. But I'm going to bring him on, and I'm going to let him tell us his story. So meet Ben Krywosz in Minnesota, and here you are. There you are. Hey, Ben. Welcome to TRU. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for traveling all the way from Minnesota to be with us.
Happy to do it. And before we get too into it, I should say that in addition to Amy having done rough cuts and also our Composer-Librettist Studio, Sarah was also a participant in our summer program, the Wesley Balk Opera Music-Theater Performer Development Program.
This is by way of Ben letting us know that a lot of the people in the room actually have worked within his programs. So yes, keep going.
Well, yeah, I think that was Sarah was around 20 years ago, 20 something years ago.
Really?
Who's keeping track?
Wow. Well, we just discovered her this year, and we're very happy to have her as part of our community.
Great.
So Ben, why don't you tell us a little bit about Nautilus Music-Theater and all the other things that you're involved in? I think this starts in 1986, or or does your start? Do you want to start your story before 1986?
Well, I should just a little bit of background. My interest in the art form actually got sparked by doing psychedelic light shows in the San Francisco Bay Area back in the late 60s and early 70s. And this was the rock and roll concert, the kind of the Jefferson Airplane, Grateful Dead kind of aesthetic. But I was really interested in the relationship between words and music and visuals. And that led to developing an individual major and intermediate, which had to do with the connection between all those elements. And that's where I discovered opera. My first opera was The Ring Cycle, of all things,
Oh my
1972.
goodness, that's
San
a
Francisco Opera.
difficult place to start.
Yeah. And then ultimately, I discovered some of the work that was being done out here in Minnesota, the Minnesota Opera with Wesley Balk, who was quite an innovative stage director and dramaturg, making pieces here at the Minnesota Opera, which at that time was quite an adventuresome and unusual and very innovative opera company. The opera world was very different back then than it is today, and it was really a unique place for new work. And ultimately, I worked with him a little bit at the San Francisco Opera Maryland program. He invited me out. I became his assistant through an apprenticeship program at the National Opera Institute. And then that was for 2 years. And when that internship was up, I actually ended up, after doing a little bit of freelancing, went to Opera America. And that was in 1984. And in 84, they had just started a program, a funding program for new work, trying to get opera companies to do new work and new kinds of work, actually with perhaps composers and writers who hadn't been involved in opera before, although not ruling out anybody who had been. But they saw that something was going on in the world of music theater, musical theater, as well as this larger world of alternative music theater.
Well, you know,
So
I want to jump right in because
yeah,
you jumped right to one of the things I was going to eventually talk about a little later. But let's talk about opera and musical theater. Let's talk about what the differences are. And you're talking about Minnesota Opera was very innovative, meaning what? What was innovative? They didn't do Carmen and Aida, or did they?
well, they did, but they would do those in innovative ways and unusual productions and really digging into the theater of the pieces. But also they did a lot of contemporary work. They also commissioned a lot of work, a lot of brand new work as well as 20th century opera. And back in those days, opera companies were not doing that kind of work at all. So they were doing different kinds of work, and they were doing very innovative productions.
Do you know enough about the history of opera to be able to talk a little bit about how opera has changed in the past century? Is that something that you would want to talk about? Because I'm very interested in the overview of musical works of musical theater for the stage, whether it's opera or musical theater itself, like Broadway and all that, and
Sure.
the differences and what influences are on our current musical theater scene. And yeah, I don't know. It's a big topic. I don't know how much you want to bite off.
Well, I'll try to be brief, which is not my strong suit, but I'll
Don't worry, we got an hour.
In my opinion, musical storytelling, that's the term that I use. And it covers any ways of telling stories musically through many different kinds of genres. The impulse to make music theater is absolutely universal. Every culture and every civilization has had some kind of musical storytelling. Whether you're talking about the ancient Greeks or Romans, or you're talking about dancing around the campfire, or Indian Kathakali, or Japanese Nobuto theater, the Japanese, the Indonesian shadow puppet stuff, Peking opera, indigenous American Indian stuff, African
Well,
ritual drumming. All of those are forms of musical storytelling.
so many questions. I'm not sure that I know this. In classic Greek and Roman theater, of course, we have the Greek chorus as a precedent for what we now call a chorus. When in the Greek, in the classics, was the chorus musical? How is music brought into the classics?
There seems to be some evidence that there was a lot of singing. We don't have any existing material because written notation wasn't as sophisticated as it is now. But certainly when the in Europe and the Camerata began to explore the in the Renaissance of trying to go back to Greek and Roman stuff, the assumption was that it was sung, and that's how one of the ways that a European opera developed. European opera happened to be Western Europe's response to this impulse to create music theater. And that's all it is. If you take a global view, there's nothing special about opera. I mean, it happens to be fabulous, and very sophisticated, but that's true of many other cultural manifestations of musical storytelling.
So help me with my history. Early opera, Gluck, Monteverdi. Who was considered the
Cavalli, all of those the Baroque and the Renaissance and Baroque composers around the late 1500s. And that was in the courts as they were really kind of exploring some of this artistic stuff, but it kind of leaked out in the public and became a major populist and commercial art form in Europe in the 1600s and 1700s, going into the 1800s. And that's something that a lot of opera people either don't know or don't like, so that's kind of ignored. And it wasn't until much later that it became opera with a capital O.
Weren't there like two mainstream versions of opera that developed? One was the serious opera, and one was just light opera.
Opera seria was a particular style, and then the opera comique or opera buffa was more lighthearted.
And Mozart wrote both.
What's that?
Mozart wrote both.
Mozart. Yes, he did. So did Rossini and a few other composers at that time, and they were different stylistically, but they were rooted in European opera and a European style of vocal production. And of course, once when we're talking about America, we're talking about Europeans coming over, taking over the lands, pushing out the indigenous American, what they called American Indians, and they brought with them, of course, European opera. And so in the early days of America, that was the standard musical storytelling was opera, especially once we gained our independence and needed to convince the world that we were a legitimate country with a legitimate cultural cachet. We had to be as European as possible. And so any attempts at creating American opera sounded pretty much like European opera, even if the subject matter was sometimes more American. But the real shift came, I think, after emancipation, after the Civil War, when the African Americans began to have some influence on our musical language, and we developed this thing called musical comedy in the late 1800s, and that was the roots of musical comedy, which later became musical theater as it got more sophisticated. So for a long time, what we think of as musical theater, Broadway American musical theater, has roots in both European opera and African American or Black musical influences.
So traditionally, people think of Oklahoma as being the turning point. Although I just saw the movie of Showboat the other night, and those songs some of them do move the action. They are well integrated into that show.
There's always been little bits and pieces of happening in different pieces, but Showboat was really one that they made a real effort. And it's a slow evolution. And artists who are working, a very small percentage of them are ones that we know. So things were evolving slowly but surely. It's not like Oklahoma just suddenly appeared out of nowhere. But there was a sense that the songs, the music could actually move the action forward a little bit. And that began to make the works more operatic structurally. But the music was still vernacular, rooted in popular music or jazz. Again, the influence of Black culture was pretty strong. And eventually, as works got more and more sophisticated, both dramaturgically and musically, then you started to get musical theater as opposed to musical comedy. And you get West Side Story, and then you get all of Sondheim and so forth. And
Well, that was a big jump from Oklahoma to West Side Story, but yeah,
Yeah,
we
but
got there.
with an evolution. There's a whole, if you look at what was happening, all the composers like Bernstein and Kurt Weill and Mark Blitzstein, even Menotti, people who had a one foot in each category, as it were, and taking a look at, they were trying to develop what they were thinking of as an American form of opera. And the assumption began to emerge that, well, musical theater, as it was known at that point, was probably the American response to the music theater impulse that I spoke of earlier. And I would suggest that actually that form that we know of, we could call it the golden age of musicals, or however you think about that chronologically, fabulous material, great stuff. But that was an important step toward what is now emerging as American musical storytelling. And that's because we now have the cultural influences of Asian American and Latino cultures that are leading to a dramaturgy that is much less linear, much more poetic, and becomes much more acceptable to tell stories in different ways, while we still have the musical influences of European opera and the Black culture in America.
Any thoughts about the shifts in opera in the 20th century, or what did happen? I know that seeing Carmen or seeing Aida is a very different experience from seeing the Harvey Milk opera.
Of course, yeah. And that's one of the things that has happened. And the program that I was running, to go back to the chronology, so from 84 to 87, I ran the very first funding program of at Opera America. It was called Opera for the 80s and Beyond. It's initiated by the Opera America hierarchy, as well as the Rockefeller Foundation, and to a certain extent the NEA. And it really tried to expose the opera world, the conventional opera world, to new work and to new kinds of work. People like Philip Glass and Robert Wilson and Lee Brewer and Paul Drescher, Meredith Monk, Laurie Anderson, they were creating work that was very different, and they were tapping into audiences that the opera world really was envious of. So we'd had that program, and at the time, it's hard to imagine now, but at the time, the opera world was quite resistant overall to the idea of new work. Very rarely was new work. In fact, one of the reasons they started the program was because in 1983, there were very few, if any, premieres of new work by professional opera companies. And during that period of time, when I was trying to persuade the opera world to do new work, I earned two nicknames. One was Johnny Opera Seed, because a lot of people saw that I was trying to encourage the creation of new works. And the other was the Opera Antichrist, that there were people who really felt like new work was going to be the death of opera, and they were too enamored of the old work to even consider new work. In the 40 years since that program occurred, there's been a 180-degree shift. And in the opera world today, almost every opera company is doing new work, trying to do new work, exploring how to make
including
new
the
work.
Met, including the Met,
including the Met, absolutely.
Fire in the Bones, whatever it was, Terrence.
Yeah. Oh, there's all sorts of stuff that's happening there. And what has emerged is a very different form of opera than European opera. And I would say that it's sort of earmarked by relatively conventional librettos that are written in prose, not verse. They're naturalistic and oftentimes adapted from material, but not always. And they're set to music that is through composed. The librettist doesn't necessarily lay out the emotional high points. I mean, that's going to vary from piece to piece. So I'm painting with a very broad brush here.
Well, the Philistine in me has always had a problem with the setting of lyrics in opera that don't sound like how you speak, and therefore it makes it very difficult to actually understand an English opera without subtitles.
Well, that's one of the challenges, and if you're dealing with composers who think primarily musically, that's going to be an issue. When you look back at classical European music, you can see the difference between composers and theater composers. We don't listen to Puccini's string quartets, and we don't listen to Brahms operas. Puccini didn't write any string quartets, and Brahms didn't write any operas. there are people who were drawn to opera. Verdi, Wagner, Puccini, Rossini, all of those folks were theater composers, and everybody else writing classical music, whether it's Bruckner or Brahms or even Schubert, Beethoven, they tried to write operas in some instances, but they don't work at all at theaters. And the only exception, of course, is Mozart, who was just a freak, and he covers all the bases.
Yeah.
Again, I'm describing this in black and white terms. Nothing is black and white. We're dealing with tendencies. We're dealing with preferences and a mixture of these things. But overall, this is what I see happening.
So I would love to have people in the room. If you have any opposing views or questions about what we're saying, please put your comments into the chat, and Owen is going to draw our attention to them. So let's make this into a conversation. We want you involved as much as the two of us up here. So let me just quote you. You're the forms of musical theater is something that you want to be, to quote you, emotionally expansive, dramatically engaging, and spiritually stimulating. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that, and where you think opera succeeds and where you think musical theater succeeds, and whether one does it better than the other, or are there just instances of successes and failures in both areas?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. That conversation is over.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, those qualities and values that you mentioned come from our mission statement, and that's a personal aesthetic on my part. However, what grows out of that is my preference is music theater, musical storytelling that where the music is accessible and emotionally expansive for the audience. And that happens more in musical theater nowadays, in some musical theater, than in contemporary opera. Things that are dramatically engaging and emotionally, something that moves us, and that leads to a larger issue that has to do with people's sensibility. And these ideas come from some work that Twyla Tharp was doing, where she recognizes that she makes different kinds of dances. She's a choreographer. She makes different kinds of dances, and some of them are kind of story dances, and some of them are kind of formal dances. And she recognizes that the formal dances are easier for her to do than the story dances. And she explored the whole idea of two different Greek words for life, and one is Zoe and one is bios. And the difference is that Zoe means life, and bios means a life. And that leads to the idea that there are some pieces, both in musical theater and in opera, if you're going to split those up, that are very, very Zoe. That is to say, there's a certain remove. You're dealing with bigger picture issues, and some pieces are very bios. They're dealing with specifically Billy and Julie are in love. Are they going to make it? What's going on with that? The specifics of somebody in a very very emotional and a very raw kind of situation, and about individuals. And some music theater isn't that way, or at least it looks at something much larger. Our connection to the characters in Hadestown, for instance, is a little bit different than if we're dealing with a Rodgers and Hammerstein piece. And when you're starting to, what's that?
I said expand on that, because that's an interesting point.
Well, it's just that what is it that you're touched by? I mean, if you see a Meredith Monk piece,
I'll tell you what I was touched by in Hadestown.
When
the thing I was touched by in Hadestown is when he opens his palm and the rose appears. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I remember that I just took my breath away. It was just that one moment. Do you know the moment I'm talking about?
It's been a while since I've seen it. I saw it on Broadway. So I remember exact moment.
I'm a little unsophisticated in my tastes. I really like easy storytelling. I like to be able to follow the storyline. I like dramaturgy. I like structure in shows. But I have to also just say that it's likes and dislikes. different people like different things, and we all have to. I mean, our country is dealing with this now on a cultural level. We have to allow room for everybody's
Of course.
needs and everybody's likes and dislikes. Um, right now, that's not happening in our country, but maybe it's happening in art and theater.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think that if somebody likes poetry, that's a different way that where words and images work. If somebody likes short stories or novels or movies, those are more naturalistic. And I think one of the key elements in musical storytelling is that it's not naturalistic.
But I buy it as real. I mean, I love musical theater.
Of course, so do I.
Nobody has to explain to me why somebody bursts into song on the street. I just perfectly I accept it. I'll do it myself at times.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. I mean, for me, I mean, the kind of work that I've been trying to work with at Nautilus is that I favor emotional realism over theatrical naturalism.
so let's talk about Nautilus for a second, because not for a second. Let's actually talk about Nautilus going forward here, because I want people to understand what your programs are and what you offer and what might be right or helpful for people in the room and people watching on YouTube.
Sure. Well, I mean, we have four different program areas. One is our artist development area, which is the Composer-Librettist Studio, our summer training institute for singer actors, and we have individual classes and coachings for local performers. Um, and we do the Composer-Librettist Studio at various places. We haven't done it in New York for a while because our host, New Dramatists, is undergoing some changes. But then we have a program called Rough Cuts, which is works in progress, where artists who are working on things want to hear their pieces in front of an audience, and we're happy to present those in whatever stage of development they might be. Amy recently had a piece that she said that last January we presented excerpts from a piece that she's been working on. Then we have fully staged productions where every 12 to 18 months, maybe we do a fully staged production if we have the money for it, and if it's a piece that if the time is right for a composer and writer that have been working on a piece with us, that we can take that to full production. And then the last thing that we do is community commissions, where we're basically available for hire to provide whatever service is necessary. I do master classes at the Berklee Conservatory. I teach at Yale in the theater department part-time. We do various kinds of workshops. If an artist has a grant and they need to workshop their piece, they may come to us and hire us to workshop it, but they may not have the capacity to do that. So those are the four big program areas. We're locally sourced, we're artisanal, we're chamber work. I love large scale musicals and opera, but that's not what we do. We don't have the resources to do that. We have a little space in Lower Town, St. Paul. And we work very intimately with people as they're trying to develop the material that they want to do.
Are you accepting any kind of submissions? What is the submission policy?
Oh, well, in theory, yes. In reality, we don't have any, we have very few resources. And my priority goes to artists who live and work here in the Twin Cities. So that we're almost exclusively local. We recently did a workshop with a composer and a writer that they were able to finance it themselves, and they were able to get a full-scale reading of it here in the Twin Cities much cheaper than they could have in New York. And just last week we did a little workshop for a local team that, again, they had gotten a grant for it and they needed to have it workshopped. So I get some people submit stuff all the time, and I was like, boy, I wish I could pursue this. I don't have the resources. We're a very, very small outfit.
Well, let me turn to one other area that I know you're very passionate about, which is collaboration. Let's talk a little bit about a collaboration and how you help collaborations. I know that you've facilitated, the number that I got is 1,750. I don't know if it's the right number or not, but
Yeah,
700.
can't keep track anymore.
Yeah, it's like 750 plus collaborations over how many years of your programs?
Well, we started the Composer-Librettist Studio actually in 1984. Before it predates Nautilus, actually. We've done 70. We're getting ready to do our 71st studio in November here in the Twin Cities. In fact, we just made the announcement on that today. And that program is we bring together 5 composers and 5 writers and 5 performers. And when we first started it back in 1984, it was an experiment on my part because I wanted to learn how to do this. And the first few years, it was kind of a Wild West collaboration. The way that we train people to collaborate in our culture is tell them to go off and work together. And that's the extent of our formal education about collaboration.
I'm sorry, I created a workshop about 10 years ago called the Director Writer Communications Lab, which is a collaboration workshop of sorts, but specifically it's a lab to help people understand how to talk about work in a first meeting, because some of the worst problems that happen are when people aren't honest with each other, when the writer and director aren't honest in their first meetings and aren't saying really what's on their mind. So I mean, if there were golden rules of collaboration, I would put honesty, not being afraid to say what you really mean, as really one of the top of the lists. Do you have any other golden rules of collaboration?
Well, I mean, there's a number of principles, and also the ability to be able to be flexible and to recognize that that a number of interactions, what I call interactive strategies, dealing with domination and accommodation, compromise, resignation, as well as collaboration, and how they all fit together into a grid about whether you value the project or do you value the relationship, and that can lead into altering those terms to be leading and following and blending. All of those things come into play. The awareness, the sense of self-awareness of what's happening at any given moment during collaboration is crucial. As far as some other basic principles, certainly trust and respect is one of them. The ability to get on the same page about what it is that you're trying to accomplish so that you're trying to solve the same problems. Creating a shared space so that there's a way of communicating that you are clearly, that you're much clearer about what's in your head, and by converting it into something real, whether it's something that's happening on stage or something that's happening like this is the actual lyric or the tune goes something like this, and to be able to convert ideas into reality quickly. The idea of being open to outside resources and strategies, having a different way of exploring decision making, and getting some clarity around that, being clear about your intentions and your agendas and your values. All of these things I think are important elements, and they have become core part of the core curriculum of the Composer-Librettist Studio.
Interestingly enough, though, a lot of what you're talking about, though it of course applies to writers who are collaborating together, it also applies to the collaboration process in general in theater, which what I was talking about originally was the director-writer relationship. The director, even the writer, producer, the director, the dynamic. There has to be respect, and the first thing that has to happen is everybody has to be on the same page. They have to be sharing the vision, and that means that not all people involved in it are going to be able to dominate with their vision. It's also a willingness to say, okay, I like your idea. I'm willing to work with you on that. You can't start fighting back and forth about, my way, no, my way, no, my way, no, my way. So it's a delicate dance. But again, to me, the first thing that has to happen is honesty. I always talk about this with producers. Writers need to always, when a producer says they're interested in a show of theirs, the writer needs to determine whether they're interested in the show that they wrote or the show that the producer sees.
Right.
And the same thing with a writer and a director. It's like, is it my show that you? I always tell writers when you're having early conversations with any collaborator, say, do you like the show as is, or are there areas that you think need to be worked on? If the person you're working with doesn't tell you that they want changes, don't assume that they don't want changes. Ask them. I try to get writers to be very vocal about that and very, very upfront and honest. The problem with the writers have in general in theater is the I'll do anything to get produced syndrome. I'll say anything you want me to say, just produce me. and it might result in them getting produced, but it's not going to result in them being happy. So communication is really very, very much a part
Absolutely.
of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. And it is about authenticity. And that requires courage. Well, first of all, it requires us a sense of self-knowledge to understand, to really know what it is that you want. And a lot of people don't really know what they want. They know what the impact is, and they know some of the ways they want to get there, but they don't really truly understand what's behind. They want to have a hit musical. They want this to be this way or that way, but what's really behind it? And my experience is that writers and composers, but especially composers, don't often dig deep into what it is that they're trying to do. But even if they do that, then it requires courage to speak, because the artists, we are all in the business of making decisions. When you make a decision, it means that something is not going to get done, and something is. And the people who wanted you to do the things that you're not going to do are very disappointed. So invariably, whatever choice that we make as artists, we're going to piss somebody off. And do we have the courage?
But the other way of looking at it is you can't please everybody.
What's that?
The other way of looking at it is you just can't please everybody.
No, exactly. And yet people try, as you say, they try to tell people what they think they want to hear and all of that.
Yeah.
And so the authentic communication truly is absolutely crucial.
Has that stimulated any questions or comments from the room? I'm trying to get the conversation going here, guys. Anybody? Owen, do we have any comments?
A lot of agreement. Talking a lot about theater as being a heightened experience. Classical music finds its way into musicals, sometimes as musical themes and songs, sometimes as plots. Rent versus La Boheme.
Okay, well, I'm going to continue. I'm going to suggest a conversation that you and I can have. Let's talk about the cross-pollination between musical theater and opera, because I think opera has had an influence on musical theater, and I think that the storytelling, the clear storytelling. Well, I'll just say one thing. Terrence McNally. I mean, what if there's ever an influence on opera from theater? It was like when we lent opera Terrence McNally for a few brilliant pieces that he created. To me, it's not so much, well, it's the libretto, it's the storytelling, I think, that is going. I'm not sure anymore. I'm saying something I'm not sure whether I believe it or not. What I know that I am influenced in my musical theater writing by opera. I use opera, certain opera kind of things I put I think of things sometimes as an aria. I do duets. I do a lot of things that I've learned from opera. I think that the storytelling in musical theater has influenced some librettists in the opera world. Would you agree? Would you disagree? Is it not an important point?
One of the things that when I was running that program back in the 80s, there was an effort. Part of it was like, let's get some playwrights. There are no librettists anymore. Let's get some playwrights to do things, and I say yes to that. And I think one of the intrinsic misunderstandings on the part of theater people, and again, I'm painting with a very broad brush. A lot of stuff that I say is intended to provoke. But my experience has been that many theater people think that opera and musicals are a form of theater. You got theater, and one form of theater happens to be musical theater. And my point is that no, music theater, opera, musical storytelling is a completely different art form unto itself. And so oftentimes you get playwrights or dramaturgs working in the world of opera or musicals, and they apply all the rules of spoken naturalistic theater to this art form that is highly stylized, very poetic, is not naturalistic, and then you run into all sorts of conflicts around that.
Well, I would clarify that point for myself by saying that you just have to know, you have to understand what the artist's style is
Well, yeah,
rather
yeah.
than try to impose
Form
something
itself.
on what they're doing.
Right.
And the artist himself has to know what his style is. Because I mean, I live and breathe artists for 34 years doing what I do. And I've seen people who every time somebody coughs, they make a rewrite. It's
Sure.
it's understanding the input that you get from others that is relevant to what you're trying to do, and being able to distinguish that from somebody else's vision that doesn't necessarily it isn't necessarily the same as yours.
I understand that. That's a whole separate issue.
Yeah.
Uh, but I'm talking about if you're going to bring playwrights in to write musicals, the process of the way a musical works or the way an opera works is completely different from the way a piece of naturalistic spoken theater works. Not many people are aware of, because it's been 40 years now, but there was a time when they started the National Endowment for the Arts. They broke everything down by the particular area of expertise. So there was a dance program, and there was a music program, and there was a theater program, and there was a film program, and there was a literature program, and there was a folk arts program.
And now there's nothing.
Well, that's not my point. My point
Yeah,
is that what happened is that in the early days of the endowment, and in the early in the mid 60s, if you were writing an opera, you would go to the music program, and if you were writing a musical, you would go to the theater program in order to get support. And after a couple of years, the opera people got really pissed off with the music people, and the musical theater people got really pissed off with the theater people, because those the specialists in that area did not understand the art form. And ultimately, the opera people and the musical theater people banded together and said, this is a completely different art form. The music people don't understand it. The theater people don't understand it. They lobbied and were successful at creating an opera musical theater program, the OMT program, that lasted about 10 years. And it had the advantage of a handful of visionary program directors, starting with Jim Ireland, then Ed Korn, Ann Ferris, Patrick Smith. And then not only did they see the relationship between opera and musicals, but they also invited all the folks that were doing music theater that was not being covered by the music program or the theater program. And suddenly you had people like Meredith Monk, Philip Glass, Laurie Anderson being able to get grants because the program recognized that that's a form of music theater. So what was frequently thought of by the establishment as these two extremes, either opera or musical theater, that spectrum now became a triangle. And it was opera, musical theater, and alternative work. And the combination of those three elements is what is in the process of what's happening now. We are creating an American form of musical storytelling that's not opera, it's not musicals, it's something else. And everybody that's working, everybody that's on this call, and everybody that's working in the field, we all have a piece of the puzzle. And we're trying to figure out, how do these pieces fit together? And what is it how does this work, and how does that work, and so forth? And as we're making this puzzle, the challenge is that we don't have the cover of the box that the puzzle came in. So we don't know what the picture looks like. So we're trying to figure it out as we go along, and to be able to say, well, the dramaturgy, a monologue is not an aria, it's not a song. What do they have in common, and how are they different?
Although it is useful sometimes to think of a monologue and an aria as being
on the metaphorical
similar.
level, there's all sorts of ways of developing this. Yes, absolutely, they fit together. But the fact is that once somebody starts singing, they have moved into a different kind of reality. It's different than somebody is speaking. We speak in everyday life, and this is the problem that so many theater people have with musical storytelling. I just hate it when they just burst into song for no reason. That doesn't happen in real life. Well, yes, of course, that's not the weakness of musical theater. That's the strength of musical theater.
Well, one of the things that we do recognize is that we say in musical theater that people sing when emotions are too great for speech. So we like to think that in most cases a song emerges from a
Of course.
very highly emotional moment.
Right, right. And for some people that is not realistic enough. That's not naturalistic. See, I happen to think that's emotionally very real,
Yeah,
but
it
it's not
works. It works
realistic.
for me.
Yeah, it works for me too. I'm
Yeah.
just saying that that's one of the challenges that I think that we who make music theater face when we're talking with theater people or people who have not fully embraced the fact that this is a weird avant-garde art form called musical storytelling. Whether you think of it as a Broadway American musical, or you think about it as musical comedy, or you think about it as opera, whether it's opera in Mozart's time or opera in Verdi's time.
But interestingly enough, I agree with you. Musical storytelling is a great overall banner for what we're doing. And there are works that are not focused on the storytelling, and they may not be your taste or my taste, but they still do exist, and
Of course,
we still have to leave room for them.
absolutely, absolutely. And that's why I think it's important that people recognize that there's an element in every music theater piece. I believe there's an element that is more Zoe, and there's always an element that's more Bios. Einstein on the Beach is a very Zoe piece, but it can be incredibly emotionally moving if you're inclined to do that sort of thing.
For 5 hours.
What's that?
For 5 hours.
Well, look at Wagner.
Oh my God. Yeah,
You know?
I know.
Okay.
I regret that I've never actually committed to sitting through
Well,
Einstein on the Beach.
then you don't have any place to talk about.
No, I really don't. I don't. I know that. But
But
it does
the
scare
point
me.
is that there's room for all of this. There's many rooms in the mansion of music theater,
Yeah.
okay, or musical storytelling, and it can happen in so many different ways. I'm going to
But
read.
But the thing that's actually important for the artists to understand is that you can have any number of ways of expressing yourself in musical storytelling, but you have to also understand where your market is. We're a producers organization, so I always have to go back to the practical. But
Of course,
you have to understand the market when you're writing something that is breaking all the rules. Don't be surprised if it has a hard time making it on
of course,
Broadway and commercial
absolutely.
theater.
And here's the thing, though. I mean, yes, that has to do with the clarity about your values. Okay, if you're writing a musical that you know is going to have a pretty small audience, is going to be done by arts organizations and more avant-garde companies, and you're okay with that, that's great. If you're trying to write a commercial musical, Broadway musical, that's a different process. If you're writing something for an opera company that's going to have 4 performances and then maybe move on to another opera company if you're lucky, that's a different process too. So clarity about what you're trying to do and who you're doing it for is important. I would argue that the notion of the composer and writer who are doing avant-garde pieces that seem not to appeal to anybody, or that there's no audience for, or that some of us who have perhaps more conventional minds don't particularly like, because I've seen a lot of stuff out there that I just think I'd have no idea what the hell's going on here. Um, but what's useful about that, Bob, is that those are the people that are expanding our language for how to tell stories. And something that was avant-garde 30 years ago becomes the norm for today. And that's wonderful to have that happen. And that's not going to be commercially successful.
It took a while to get to Hamilton, to get to a point where rap and hip hop actually was able to effectively be used in commercial theater. I'm sure that non-commercial there are
Sure.
probably outlets.
Yeah.
But Hamilton was a turning point.
Yeah, so you're talking about maybe 30 to 40 years, but if you're talking about opera, you're talking about a European opera. We're talking about 400 years. So things are accelerating. And look at the work of Philip Glass. I mean, back in the 70s and 80s, that was considered odd and weird and not particularly musical, and now we hear it in car commercials.
Right, exactly.
I mean, it's become a different norm, and the same thing with rock and all of the other vernacular music. Vernacular music changes at a faster pace than so-called classical music.
Well, that's a whole other conversation that we didn't have, which is basically the influence of pop music on theater.
Well, it used to be that we got our pop music from Broadway, and now Broadway gets its music from pop music.
Well, and in some cases, yes. In some cases, Broadway maintains the standard and the language that it's used to, that's been
Well, of
used to
course,
for 50 years.
the fact is that Hamilton is not a rap opera. It's actually, I mean, it's not a rap musical theater piece. It's a musical theater piece, and
That
it's
uses,
written by a
that
Broadway
uses,
baby. He loves
yeah.
Broadway, and that's what he wrote, was a musical theater piece that was rooted in Broadway. But just in the interest of being provocative, one of the things that I say to some of my colleagues is that the term European opera is redundant, and the term American opera is an oxymoron.
Okay. I get that. I like that. Owen, there have been comments and questions. I see them. So can you take
Yes,
us through them?
we had a very interesting comment from Kevin Purcell saying directors also need to understand that composers create layers of meaning in their music which aren't instantly recognizable by a director who overly concentrates on the book and lyrics, and they don't have the listening skills.
Yep.
Well, they say discuss. So I
Yeah.
guess what's your response to that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
When I see a director who's directing a music theater piece and he's working from a script or libretto rather than the score, then I know that something is amiss there, and that a lot of the impact of the piece is going to be lost on him and hence the audience. So that I do think there's some basic musical listening skills that need to come into play for a director who is working in the realm of opera or music theater, musical storytelling.
Well, there's actually one thing that musical theater learned from opera and has been using for many decades now, which is leitmotif. The whole concept of leitmotif. That I don't think that was inherent in the development of musical theater. I think it was something that somebody probably. Oh, I'm trying to think who uses it a lot. Well, Sondheim certainly does.
Sure. No, I mean, that's a standard tool now.
Yeah, it is standard.
Verdi and Wagner.
But I don't think it was standard in the 20s and 30s. I mean, I think in the development
of musical
theater.
That was when musical comedy was slowly becoming musical theater.
We also didn't talk about the influence of operetta on early musical theater, which is another whole conversation.
Well, I think we're slicing things pretty thin when we get into operetta, and some of the influences are aesthetic and some of them not. But I will say that, and this is something that a lot of theater people get hung up on, that in trying to make a distinction between an opera and a musical, and of course this comes around Sweeney Todd or Les Mis or any of these works. What's the difference between an opera and a musical? So that oftentimes theater people, well, it's got spoken dialogue, so therefore it must be a musical, or there's no spoken dialogue, it must be an opera. But let go of that. I just say there are so many operas that have spoken dialogue and are not sung through, even without recitative. And there's a lot of musicals that don't have any spoken dialogue. So ultimately, that's not a distinction. And invariably, anybody that tries to define a piece in and of itself, the piece itself, is it an opera or is it a musical? You come up with any definition, and somebody will come up with an example of why that definition doesn't work. And ultimately, I have come down on the side of recognizing that ultimately a piece will be experienced by the audience dependent upon what is the vocal style of the performers.
Oh.
And if a piece sounds like an opera because it's being sung in an operatic fashion, that's how it will be experienced. And if a piece is sung by musical theater folks with a different kind of a vernacular style that is not the European classically trained voice, it'll be experienced as a musical. And that's something that is a challenge, because there's a lot of contemporary opera being written today that would actually be really strong theater pieces, but aren't going to get the kind of exposure that they need because they use classically trained operatic voices. And those of us who have acquired a taste for the classically trained operatic voice forget that it's an acquired taste, and that most Americans have not acquired a taste for that kind of voice. They can recognize it as, oh, that's good singing, but they may not like it. They may not want to hear it very much, and that's going to cut them off from most contemporary opera and even from most classical opera.
Well, Owen, are there other comments? I know
yes. Janet Conrad asked, Ben, what were some of the first operas, musicals, plays, and/or TV and radio shows that you had wonderful experiences with near the beginning of your extraordinary endeavors?
Well, the Ring Cycle, as I mentioned, that kind of blew my mind. And that revealed to me, like, oh, there are people who are dealing with some of the ideas that I wanted to. I remember a production of Rigoletto that was done by Jean-Pierre Pinel at the San Francisco Opera. That was around 1973. Seeing the chorus line, which I saw a number of times, the production of the chorus line was, I saw it on tour in San Francisco a number of times. That totally blew me away. And then there was a lot of other work like Einstein on the Beach, Meredith Monk's Atlas that I was involved in actually setting that up with the Houston Grand Opera. The Gospel at Colonus, Slow Fire, Laurie Anderson's work, all of that stuff. And of course, all of Sondheim. That was a revelation. My introduction to Sondheim was I bought this album called Side by Side by Sondheim. So I dipped into a bunch of Sondheim's work without even knowing what it was. And as a child, I remember my sister had a recording of from the film of West Side Story. I had no idea what the hell it was about, but I remember those songs as being fabulous songs. So I have the advantage, if it is an advantage, of having very eclectic tastes and being exposed to many different kinds of things.
Amen to that. Very eclectic. One of the reasons you're a great guest. Next up.
RK Green asks, how does Nautilus ignite new work and leverage the Twin Cities resources?
Well, we do the Composer-Librettist Studio, which I mentioned before. We try to do that at least once a year. And again, like anything else, that's a function of funding. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, so we rely a lot on grants and on donations from donors. But that allows us to bring together composers and writers and performers here in the Twin Cities, and then we offer them opportunities on rough cuts to be able to hear their pieces as they're working on something sort of in mid process, and they want to check out what does this sound like. Then we give them really high quality performers to work with, many of them who are dramaturgically astute. And I should say at this point too that when you, Bob, when you talked about the collaborative aspect between the playwright and the director, in addition to the playwright and the composer, or the composer and the lyricist, it's a tragedy that performers are not taken advantage of in a positive way more than they are. The performers, that's where things happen. That's the interface between the theoretical piece that the composer and the writer have written and the actual experience of the audience. And performers are far more intelligent, more astute, and more sensitive to musical storytelling than we give them credit for, as a general rule. That's not true of all performers, of course, but I just think that, I mean, I recently saw a reading of a piece, lovely piece, really strong, wonderful performers, and came time for the talk back, and it was just the composer and the dramaturg. And the performer I know that the performer had a major role in helping to shape the piece, but why not bring them on stage and have them participate as a collaborator? Because that's the collaboration between what the performer can do with the material. That's a really important role.
Agreed. Anyone else?
Amy Engelhart has high praise for you, Ben. Highly encourage everyone to work with Ben. He made connections I never thought about, and he thinks in truly inspiring ways. His composer/librettist studio was an intense and wonderful 2 weeks, and working with him as a director last year was equally as dimension adding for our piece.
Well, thank you, Amy. That's very sweet of you to say.
Well, it's a decent place to stop, unless there are any other questions from the room.
I wanted to read one last thing to you.
Sure.
This is actually from a review of a book that was written about the Verdi operas that he wrote on Shakespeare. And this quotes and Verdi, for those of you maybe not that familiar with the opera world, Verdi is kind of considered like the Shakespeare of opera. He's a major figure in the opera world, and his works are considered to be masterpieces, many of them. But in any case, this review of this one portion of the book says, We read with awe of Verdi's painstaking analysis of how this or that should be sung or acted. He had difficulties persuading lionized singers that much required sotto voce or cupo, hollow singing, which their grandstanding resisted. He was, quote, determined to break away from the tyranny of good singing, from the empty beauties of bel canto, insisting not only that the characters singing should be ugly, but that they should themselves look ugly, like medieval symbols of vice. Quote, I want the performers to serve the poet, i.e. the librettist, better than they serve the composer. He went so far as to say that his singers should not sing. Now, I share that because I think there's a lot of people who think about musical theater, a lot of musical theater people who think about opera as being solely oriented toward the music. But the major opera composers that have lasted, when you talk about Mozart or Rossini or Bellini or Verdi or Wagner or Puccini, all of those folks, they were people of the theater. And I think that when you begin to separate opera and musicals, you cut yourself off on both sides. The opera people who refuse to listen or pay any attention to musical theater, and the musical theater people who refuse to pay any attention or listen to opera. You're shooting yourself in the foot. There is so much information to share back and forth. And Bob, as you mentioned, you've been influenced by opera. The art form certainly has. And we're headed towards something, and this is where all of you who are creating work, this is the exciting moment. You're in the process of developing an American form of musical storytelling. It's going to grow out of European opera. It's going to grow out of early American musical comedy and theater. We're headed towards something different. And when you take a look at the classic Golden Age musicals, and then you look at Hamilton or Hadestown or Dear Evan Hansen or any of the stuff that's happening now, you're starting to see a shift into a different kind of musical storytelling. And I believe that that's uniquely American. That's what's growing out of our culture. This is our story. This is the way that we see the world, and we're going to demand and make music theater that reflects our culture and who we are.
I want to throw a wrench in. First of all, I want to acknowledge the writers in Australia. You don't have to be making breakthroughs in American theater, but nevertheless, we never really talked about the differences between the British musical theater and American musical theater. It's a big topic to jump in right now, but sure. I do want to say that I think there is a core difference in the storytelling in Britain versus American musicals. I don't know if you agree with that or not.
I suspect that's true. I don't know enough about the British musicals to be able to say, but I suspect you're probably right.
Comparing a Sondheim musical with a Lloyd Webber musical gives you kind of a starting place to start thinking about the differences. There are differences.
Well, sure, and England is part of Europe, so there's a worldview that's rooted in Europe as opposed to what America is.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the reasons why it's different.
Does anybody want to add anything to that before we close up? Looking at the room, any I couldn't remember the word virtual. Oh my God! Any virtual hands that want to be raised? So RK is pointing out Gilbert and Sullivan. Gilbert and Sullivan has had a lot of influence on American musical theater, sure. I think. Susan Crawford.
Sorry, I'm here. I'm just wondering where Ben sees Threepenny Opera fitting in with this evolution that he's been enunciating for us.
Well, there are all those composers like Weill and I can't think of the other guy who straddled both worlds. Weill was a serious classical composer, but he also loved musical theater. He absolutely loved it.
Well, and he became a musical theater composer when he came to America. The value of the Threepenny Opera was an early Brecht piece, and Brecht was in the process of developing his point of view about theater, which has been essential to where it has gone today. So Brecht was not writing naturalistically, even though sometimes it may seem like it. But there you've got a play that has songs interspersed and makes a mockery of opera in a healthy, positive way. I think Threepenny Opera is one of the core elements that eventually will lead to American musical storytelling because of the way the dramaturgy works. That we don't get hung up in those characters in the same way that we do with Puccini or Sondheim or Rodgers and Hammerstein. I think it's a major piece, and it allowed Kurt Weill to begin to develop his point of view about how to tell stories through music, and where he became an American composer once he arrived in America.
One touch of Venus. Yeah, it was a different. But I have to say that Weill did not completely change his vocabulary when he moved into musical theater. He still kept a very hard-edged kind of musical style that I adore.
Sure, yeah, and I mean, in street scene that certainly comes through. But again, you had a whole generation of composers and writers trying to figure out this thing called American opera. What might that be like? But that's a big topic. I need to be moving on here. But this was fun. I hope that provided you with whatever it is that you wanted, Bob, and that the folks sitting in enjoyed it and maybe gotten some buttons pushed in some way.
I think we got some very positive feedback in the room. I'm going to you can leave. I'm going to actually say a few words to YouTube before I close up.
Okay.
So,
all right.
So honestly, I want to thank Ben Krywosz for being with me today. I appreciate his taking the time to spend an hour or so with us and talk about so much of what he knows about musical theater and opera. A lot more than I know. So I was impressed and very challenged by hearing everything he had to say. I want to thank the people in the room for being with us every week. And people out there in YouTube land, if you're just discovering us, and if you think it might be fun to be here with us and in the room and asking questions and being part of the discussion, I can make that happen. Just email me. Email me at trunltd@AOL.com. I'm sorry, trunltd@AOL.com. So I'll add you to the Zoom list and we'll invite you back. I mean, I've got weeks and weeks of things planned. Next week, actually, we're going to talk about the developmental path of new shows, comparing United Kingdom and Australia and the United States. I've got producers from all three areas who are going to be here. After that, we're going to have an interview with an up and coming playwright and talk about how you make breaks in early career. And then after that, we're going to be talking about filming plays. We're going to have a little session about our True Speak evening of filmed short plays that's coming up. In September, I've already started booking that. We're going to have people who have just performed in the Fringe, who are come back from the Edinburgh Fringe. They're going to talk about their experience. I've got 4 different shows that are going to be represented, and probably very, very different points of view. Arts and activism. Dominique Sharpton, the Reverend Sharpton's daughter, is going to be with us, and a woman named Casey Fannin, who's a friend of mine. On and on and on. I just keep doing this. I can't stop. I'm addicted to this. What can I tell you? So you're all codependents here. You're keeping me addicted to doing these weekly shows. We do this as a community service. We've started off as a community service. So it's always been free. I mean, everybody's welcome to come for free. Honestly, you are. There's a little reality though going on, which is that now that we're back to live performance and now that we're back out of shutdown, do you know that things are costing 40 to 60% more than they cost pre-shutdown? So we do need financial support from everybody. If you can, pay a ticket price when you come visit us here, or make a donation. You can go to trudonate.com, trudonate.com. give us a little something to keep us going. Right now, we have a summer donor drive going on, and we actually are trying to raise $20,000, and we're halfway there. We're past 10,000 already. So help us with that. Join as a member. That would be nice. Anyway, I hope I'll be meeting some of you soon. I want to thank all the people in the room for being with us. My friends in Australia, my God, go get some sleep now. They were here like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning in Australia time. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I deeply appreciate your support. I guess that's it. Just hope to see you all in the weeks to come. Thank you.